Jennifer Locke is a ghostwriter and book strategist who helps business owners, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs become authors and showcase their brilliance on the page. She has been writing for 11 years with experience ghosting for major publishers. As a book coach, she has helped dozens of authors write their own books. She has also developed a guide called Book in 6 to help authors write a book in 6 months. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Jen, thanks for being here.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me, Charlie.
You know, everybody has been telling me to have you on. I think I invited you on at a time when you were doing like a pile of books at once. I'm so glad we could finally make this happen.
Well, I'm curious as to who all you've talked to, but that's very nice to say and flattering of those people. And I know we run in kind of the same circles on LinkedIn. So that's very nice. I like to network with a lot of ghostwriters a lot and kind of build my network bench pretty deep, so to say. So anyway, that's nice of you to say.
I actually, and I hadn't even planned to get into this, but it sounds like, it seems like there's a friendliness to networking in our community that is so lacking in other corners of LinkedIn, from what I can see. Do you find that to be the case?
I think I've always been, well, when I first got into ghostwriting or thought of it as something that would be a viable career option for me, I knew absolutely nothing. So I did researching online about, what to charge, how to advertise oneself. I didn't know anything. And so from the beginning, I just kind of looked for people online who seemed to have it together from what I could tell from their online presence. And this was before Zoom was such a thing. So I would call them up on the phone and, arrange an email them and ask if I could please talk to them and ask them some questions. And so that's always been just a part of what I've done. And I think it's really necessary because it's not like people necessarily go to school for this. It's not like there's a proven track that you should be making this much with this book and you should be making this much. You can find lots of different information about that online, but how do you decide for yourself what's an appropriate amount to charge and when to change it and whatnot? So I've always found networking with other ghostwriters to be just vital to me feeling like I know what I'm doing. And confidence building. And then you can more confidently go into conversations with prospective authors and, the sharing of resources that happens amongst people in our profession. It not only makes you feel more confident as a service provider and a ghostwriter, but it makes you feel more confident when you're talking with the authors that you work with and able to present options for them as they, take their books and publish them and take them next step. So yeah, that's always been a core part of what I've been doing.
It's so true. I call it like work coffee or whatever. And you and I have had one of those conversations where I like to just know what people are working on, because I'd so much rather if a book comes along that's really not for me, but it does sound like a promising project, I want to have someone in mind where it's exactly their kind of book. And that's why I love to just check in with people and see what they're working on. And I love what you said about how there is especially when you're starting out, to kind of normalize those conversations and to feel like charging X amount is what everybody's doing because you've surrounded yourself with the right people. And I don't know, I like you were saying, I found people to be so generous with their time when I kind of wanted to figure out about how to do this as a business. How did you get into ghostwriting? What were you doing before, and what made you want to start doing books?
So I got into it, let's see. So way back in the day, I was an high school English teacher. That was way back in the day. Prior to having I have 8-year-old twins and another daughter, twin girls and another daughter who's about to be 3. And prior to having the twin girls, I was in the workforce working in nonprofits, very, very low paying nonprofit job. And that I realized that was going to be untenable when, having two, it was not going to pay for daycare, was not going to be worth it. So eventually I dropped out of the traditional workforce. Didn't expect to do that, but that's what I ended up doing. And then eventually I saw people who were writing online, and I had seen that before, even when I was traditionally employed, and wondered how in the world that they were doing it. I really started to decide to pursue online writing, quote unquote, in 2017. And so I took some courses about how to do that, how to pitch. I eventually connected with someone who, very randomly, I connected with someone who wanted thought leadership articles ghostwritten. And so eventually this person told me that they wanted a business book, and they asked me if I had ever done that before. And I definitely had not, but I had written fiction. I'd been writing novels like 6 years prior to that point of connecting with that person. So I knew I had the skill set of doing long form writing. Writing a book didn't totally freak me out. In fact, I'd kind of hoped that that's the way that the relationship with the person would go, because I figured that it was a skill that I had that not everybody had, that I could capitalize on. And so that was the first one. That was how it started. I realized how much I enjoyed it. I've never worked with anyone that I've had a stinky relationship with. All of the authors that I've worked with have been pretty great. And so, we appreciated one another. I liked the long form of it. I liked the income stability. So that's how I got into it.
Nice. Yeah, those there's an analogy I made recently, and I don't think I've said this on the podcast, but I love repeating this, but it's kind of, and actually this came up on like an AOG call, so you might have been there for this, but there was somebody who was totally new to ghostwriting who seemed to be under the impression that you should start with short form and then work your way up to books. And my reply to this person was, well, no, like if you want to write books, you should write books, because one is not, it's like the difference between bouldering and mountain climbing. Like one is not easier than the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a question of which one is more appealing to you. And so you should do the thing you want to do.
And it's all about your mindset, I would say. How, so much of getting into it is being confident that you can deliver it. And so some people want to get into ghostwriting, but they've never actually written a book. And for them, I mean, I wouldn't say that is prohibitive. It's still possible. But I think having the confidence in yourself that it's something that you can even do is really critical. So, sometimes if people find themselves in that situation where they want to get into it, but they haven't done it themselves, I always recommend, write a 35,000 word ebook about something, and just feel confident that you have the skill in yourself that you can do it, and then confidently market your services to other people.
And that's a good point too, because there's a lot of books out there that, I mean, there's actually very few books that are sort of begging to be written. Most of them are speculative, or the idea comes first. And so you can always, I mean, that my first book was one that was literally in my backyard. It was a family project. And I always tell people whether it's like a company you're already working for that could use some longer form content, that's a great way to do it. Or family member wants to tell their story. Just some crazy dude, who has great stories.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's it. And what kind of, I'm curious, what kind of fiction were you writing?
So I still write fiction. I write middle grade fiction. I'm represented by a literary agent for that.
Oh,
and so and that's part of what gave me the confidence I was like, well, I have a literary agent, which people have them and then they lose them. There's all different like gradations or whatever in terms of the publishing benchmarks that people hit. But I still write middle grade fiction. In fact, I was up revising chapters this morning. They tend to be contemporary, but this one that I'm working on has more light fantasy elements. So It's fun.
That's great.
Yeah, that's my first love always. So.
Have you ghostwritten fiction?
No, and I draw a hard line on that because,
Oh,
yeah, the fiction is for me and the nonfiction is for my clients.
I this information is going to be outdated when the podcast comes out, but I just recently signed with an agent, and which I'm like, yeah, so excited. But we had a conversation recently where there was a project where it was, because as you know, that there's a certain, you're supposed to run book length work by your agent to see if they want to represent it. And there was a project that I had started as a business book before I signed, and it turns out it's not something where they're seeking mainstream publication or representation, so not really in her wheelhouse. But she said, on the next one, when you negotiate your rate, tell them to talk to your agent.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I told her that. I was like, I'm gonna really enjoy saying that.
Yeah. That's really nice. Yeah, my agent doesn't do she does all fiction, which is not really useful to me in my no, obviously it is for my novels, but my nonfiction is totally different. But that's awesome. Yeah, I don't it's the two worlds are completely separate for me, and that is not true for other ghostwriters who have literary agents. But it's always interesting for me to hear about the relationships, and congrats, because that's a huge deal. So.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's exciting for sure. And I'm always kind of fascinated by how you're not, like, there's a lot of great writers out there who would never ghostwrite, and so there is a demand at agencies and beyond for ghostwriters and collaborators. There's one thing that I want to get into, because I think you would really be able to speak to this, that the work-life/compensation balance of what we do, I think, is seriously appealing once, and a lot of people don't even know about it, but once they do, I think it's very attractive. And I think it seems like with ghostwriting, it's totally possible to raise a family, be in your kids' lives, be home, but it's also like it's a serious, high-paying career where you're not really compromising or doing a sort of like part-time, I can make this work during the school day sort of job. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just seems like that's a great, and like for me, the balance is in, like, I get to do a lot of things in the outdoors that I'm essentially a part-time expedition sea kayaker, and I live on a beach. But what does that balance look like for you? And what would you say to either like a parent thinking about ghostwriting, and maybe they took some time off and this is their way of getting back to work, or like a ghostwriter thinking about becoming a parent?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, that's absolutely why I wanted to do it, rather than other forms of writing, rather than random article writing, which is what I did in the beginning to break into kind of the online business space, even though back then I didn't know that I was starting a business, but that's what you have when people pay you for your work. But that's why I wanted to get into it, because I saw the potential of being able to earn great money and still be, have flexible hours and be involved, the type of involved parent that I envisioned myself becoming. And definitely more than any quote unquote career track that I'd been on prior to freelancing, being on my own. I was never super attracted to any corporate ladder. I wasn't even in those streams because I was in education and then nonprofit. And so then when I got into ghostwriting, it was like, okay, well, I didn't just get into it. It was intentional because I saw the income potential, and that was very attractive. So, I think it's a great career option for someone who wants to write, and of course, going with an online business, it's not just writing. there's networking, there's marketing, there's LinkedIn, there's email lists, there's all of these other things that go into running your own online business, even if it's ghostwriting, and people have all different approaches to all of those other things. So I want to say that to clarify, it probably doesn't need saying, but it's not like you just hang out your shingle and then you have somebody at your door who's going to pay you 6 figures to write the book. It doesn't work that way. But there is absolutely the potential to command those really high rates with just a few books under your belt, or even one book under your belt. The potential is limitless. So if you're a parent, if you're thinking about becoming a parent, getting into this career, I think it's a great option. If you're a ghostwriter who's thinking about having kids, then I would say kind of it's the same if you run any online business. You kind of want to fund your maternity leave, or paternity leave, or whatever it is that is coming up, and just be strategic about it. But if you're in the business space, you're being strategic anyway. So it requires planning and plotting, but it's doable.
And that's such a good point, that there are a lot of great reasons to do this, but thinking that it's easy is not one of them. I really like that this thing Steve McQueen said, that he got into acting to escape the 9 to 5 and ended up working 70 hours a week. And I think ghostwriting, like for me, it's more, this is the grind that I want.
Yeah.
And just knowing that, like, I've lately been going through some stuff where I need to look after my parents, and I'm on the other side of the Atlantic from them, so that's not actually very straightforward. But the fact that I don't have to explain that to anyone or ask for time off or whatever I'm still going to have to work really hard, but
right,
I'm not having to choose between my career and my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I was just working last week on I was on vacation, but I was working. Obviously, like, nobody's going to say you don't take your vacation days and then that's it. There's a high level of responsibility with everything involved, including getting the next project, including how you market yourself, including networking. But it's a chance for personal growth. I think entrepreneurship is a great opportunity to do that. And so I'm all for it.
There was something you posted on LinkedIn recently, and it was kind of a personal win you were celebrating, and that is that your kids are now all in school full time, or they will be, and that's like a new chapter. And I'm wondering, what has watching them grow up taught you about storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was writing, like, I write middle grade fiction, so that's for kids. And so I had been doing that prior to the birth of my oldest, to our twin girls, who are 8.5. And then I continued to do it afterwards. And I would say just the switch, and this is not necessarily true for everyone, but it was my own personal experience. But prior to becoming a parent and then becoming a parent, it was kind of like all the, I cut through the BS a lot more and wrote more from the inside out rather than the outside in. And that was just a personal evolution that I remember noting when they were born, just a consequence of feeling much more vulnerable in the world, I would say, as a parent, and having, babies to protect. But, as I've reread books through their eyes and with them, I think that a good kids book is a good book, period. And it's able to engage anyone. There's certain elements that make it engaging, like it's very humorous. It's fast paced. It doesn't drag. It doesn't get mired too much in description. And I would say that that's true for any book. And what holds true for kids' books is also true for grown-up books, adult books as well. I'm kind of giving several answers to your question all at once. But I would say, so seeing what captures them, seeing what keeps them interested. And then also there's not necessarily about storytelling itself, but I think the main thing for me has been learning to snatch time where I can and to write, from the early days when they were napping or in the morning or after they go to sleep. There's always, I don't do this perfectly by any means, but little bits of writing add up. And so sometimes people think I don't have enough time to make a significant contribution to this manuscript right now, so I'm not going to do it. But even just 10 minutes, 100 words, those things build on themselves and momentum gathers behind the work. And so staying connected in those ways, and kind of snatching time and grabbing writing time when you can, becomes really important when you have a lot of demands on your time.
I believe it. By the way, did you see that post? It went kind of viral for all the wrong reasons, but it was some guy on LinkedIn talking about like his like optimized day. And it was like a list starting at, first of all, first problem starting at like 5 a.m. or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, he's got his like journaling and lifting weights and this and that and his breakfast. And you realize pretty quickly that this is not someone who has any responsibilities for other humans, and very likely has another person like looking after.
Right. Yeah. This wasn't satire. This was a real earnest.
It was a serious post. Like, if you want to be successful like me, you got to like wake up and have a smoothie and immediately start journaling and lifting. But it was followed by just brutal satire, and a lot of it coming from parents, especially moms. And
that's so funny. And those are so like overdone at this point that it's like hard to believe people are still doing it and thinking that others will take them seriously. Yeah. I'm all for morning time. I'm all for getting up before my kids are awake. And that means very early, but that's just not always possible, if they're up in the night many times. And there's so many other factors that go into it. And it's when you see that, it's like, oh, a nice for you, dude. Like,
and there's something, I mean, weird priorities, right? I mean, I don't have kids, but my window into this is having older parents and just knowing I'm only going to have so many more breakfasts with my dad. Probably single double digits, maybe. And so on days that I get to spend with him, I don't really care if I hit my 1 rep max or hit my word count. It's not very important. And do you find that, like, as a parent, like that shift in priorities is good for your writing, because you're not, like, I would imagine you're not going to get as much writer's block if writing isn't like the end all be all, and you have somebody who means more to you than just your.
Yeah. Well, you're still yourself, you know what I mean? So you still care about the things that you cared about before. If somebody's a parent, if they have something else, this is the experience I'm speaking to. I don't think is necessarily, all only for parents. Like, you're still yourself. You still care about the things that you cared about before, and you want to do them still. And it's such a blessing to, I'm so thankful for my kids and had a long road to have them, which is kind of another story. But also, like, then it's easy to get caught up in all of the minutia and like unimportant things of life. So I wouldn't say I'm just blissed out in by any means. There's a whole lot of pickup and running around and things that constitute my the hours of my day. But that there was I will notice in myself as a writer, and it feels like such a long time ago now in the grand scheme of things. It really was not, but just the shift that occurred for me from being when I was not a parent to when I became a parent. And I bet that shift would happen for a lot of other people, caused by a lot of other factors. But that's what did it for me.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's that I guess it's that like next phase of growing up, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
It's kind of when like life gets brought home to you and you mature for whatever the circumstances are that caused that.
yeah, and I mean, I guess back to that confused LinkedIn guy. I mean, yeah, getting my smoothie at exactly the right time was really important when I was like 20 and didn't have
Uh,
any other priorities. Um, Shifting gears a little bit to the work itself. This is a question I love to ask people who specialize in business books and entrepreneurship books. How do you find the narrative and the book in a business or a brand? Because I feel like the word storytelling gets bandied around in marketing, and it doesn't always have substance. But in a book, there has to be storytelling. Like you can't get by on just branding alone or whatever. How do you find that when you're working with a business client?
well, first, I think it's really important to know what their intention is for the book. Sometimes people just say, I just want a book, and that's not really good enough. you know so it's like, okay, so it begins by taking a really strategic look at like, what is your business now? Who are you serving? Who do you want to be serving? Because it takes an awful lot of time to write the book and then to publish the book and then to market the book, and you're going to be speaking about this thing for, let's say, the next 5 years. So you have to be sure that the book is really setting yourself up well for where you want to be going in your business. So that's the first conversation that we have, is looking at why they want to have a book, what they want it to accomplish. And then perhaps they have, an existing framework that they use already, or some other type of system for going about their work. So we take a look at that. And then, I ask, who do you want to be serving? Who is this book speaking to? What is the point that they are at when they pick up the book? And where do you want them to be by the time they finish it? And then kind of building out the framework and the ideas from there to show that logical progression. And, I think anything can be inherently interesting if it is told well and if there's a strong voice behind it. So that's a big part of what I do as well, pulling out stories from the author, asking them to go deeper and things that pique my own interest. I'm kind of like the third party as a reader will one day be. And so I'm drawing out stories from them. I'm asking, like, what about this? What about that? And kind of, turning around corners and seeing what we find.
Nice. It seems like with business clients, there are so many opportunities to be the voice of, explain it to me like I'm six or something like that, because I see so many business leaders where they just take what they know for granted and they breeze through it without giving a lot of context.
Right. And they've been doing it for however many years at this point. So it's all secondhand to them. And it's really useful to have someone who's coming to it cold, who needs to be explained to in an entertaining way what it is they're talking about.
I had one recently where I was like, I almost didn't ask this, and I kind of can't say what the question is because it will reveal what business I was working with, whatever. But it was a business client, and I was like, if I say this out loud, he is going to think I am so dumb. So I probably shouldn't. And then I said it, and he was like, that's actually the biggest like myth that we need to bust. And everybody asks that. And it was unbelievable. And like that like broke, and it was right when we were trying to get an outline together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I think my hesitance to ask that was actually the sign that it was probably a pretty important question. And that there are no stupid questions moment gave us our theme. And before that, it didn't really seem like this guy had much of a book on his hands.
Yeah, that's really, and I've had that experience as well. It seems like they're dancing around something, and it seems so like it should be obvious, but you as the extra person in the scenario are going, wait, do we miss something really important? I'm afraid to ask because I don't want to look like an idiot. But then it ends up opening like, oh, that's actually kind of the most important thing. So, but yeah, that's why people need that person to make sure they're actually getting into the heart of it instead of kind of dancing around the outside of it, whatever it is for them.
Um, I love to know what people's hot takes are. And, is there something that you see a lot, either with business authors or kind of just generally the approach to business books that is just like so wrong? And, or if you, because I know you also give people advice on how to write their own books. Is there something you try to like steer them clear of a mistake you see a lot of people making? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say the biggest mistake people make is thinking that it's supposed to be easy. There's all of this garbage online about like, write your book in 9 hours or whatever it is, whatever the current promise being sold is. And so people trick themselves into thinking that it's going to be easier than it is. So they can, as an own mind, like if they're planning to write it, they'll keep on telling themselves, well, I have an outline and I have this. So really it's just going to take some time to bust it out, and it's not going to take that long. Or if they're thinking about hiring a ghostwriter, sometimes I see people tricking themselves about how much work it is because they want to pay not that much to someone else. And, the reason that you and I are able to do it well and quickly is because we've got more than a decade under our belts at this point of working specifically in this form. So when people are doing it for the first time and they think that it's going to be easy, they inevitably get frustrated and think that there's something wrong with them. But like, who said it was easy to write a book? Who started that lie and began peddling it around the internet?
Yeah, I would love to know because I have some strong words for that person. I know exactly what you're talking about. Have you ever encountered like in a discovery call or a pitch? Have you ever found yourself kind of pitching against that, where somebody says to you something like, well, I could do this. Couldn't I just do this on ChatGPT? Or couldn't I just, I found this person on Fiverr and they're going to do my whole book for $200. Like, has that come up, or do you do a good job weeding that out before that?
I think I'm doing a better job of weeding that out, primarily because I have like a questionnaire that I make people ask, and I have like, this is my starting rate on there. Is this something that you can pay, yes or no? And in fact, I need to update it because it's not accurate anymore in terms of what my starting rate is. So that helps to weed out some people. But yes, for sure, I've run up against that. Or so people thinking that it's going to be easy and that they can just get away with doing like the slapdash version of it. Or people thinking that once they have the book, then it's like, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Just because you say you're a ghostwriter doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to have people flooding to you and paying huge amounts. Just because you write a book doesn't mean that, Good Morning America is suddenly going to be knocking on your door and that people are going to be buying your book by the droves. Like, it takes very intentional marketing. It takes having a plan. It takes like lots of things to make a book a success and to garner the type of name for yourself you imagine that simply having the book will get you automatically. So I sidebarred a little bit into that second one, but yeah.
No, it's so true. And I think by the time this interview goes up, we will have had on someone to talk about PR for writers and marketing, and she worked on some really major Big 5 deals. And, you know, the people out there who think they're going to sell like 1 million copies or whatever, you could sell like you could sell like 5% of that and have a New York Times bestseller.
Look, yeah, that'd be amazing.
The bar is actually very, very low, and it's nowhere near 1 million copies. And which is not to say it's easy to write a New York Times bestseller, but for the people who do it, it's simple math. It's not.
Yeah, and it always involves very intentional marketing on the part of the author. Even if you have a publishing house behind you, in order to get the publishing deal, you have to present a very strategic plan about how you're going to market it. So that's something that I say a lot, like whether you self-publish or whether you traditionally publish, it's still on you to get the word out about your book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think book proposals are something that have come up for people going traditional on this podcast before. I think we're going to have a follow-up episode that's just about that. But there are some those misconceptions about, oh, well, there's this huge, I wrote a book that's for parents and there's millions of parents, so therefore there's millions of potential readers is kind of one of the biggest fallacies in book marketing. But it's like, okay, well, unless you have some kind of special access to that community, like if you have the #1 like parenting blog, then yes, like that is a readership you might be able to count on. But otherwise, like that doesn't mean anything.
Right. It requires a lot of strategy. I mean, it's a big deal to write a book and it's a big deal to market it. So there's nothing slapdash about it. So, and there's nothing easy about it. So yeah, my hot take, my #1 thing to dispel is just rid yourself of the notion that any part of this is supposed to be easy.
Yes, and stop using the word just. People say I just need it written or I just need some editing. If the word like just is in your email, I'm instantly
red flag.
Oh. But actually, like part of your business, and it's a very unique type of coaching. You help people with these early planning considerations to get the writing going and to give themselves a sort of a plan they can believe in. What like questions do I need to answer before I start writing a book?
Well, it's so this is a lot of the questions that I ask people in the intake process for those intensives that you're talking about, and I call them your big book plan intensives. But I want to know why you're thinking about writing it, why you are the person to write it. Oftentimes people are torn between two different ideas, and that could be a sign of resistance with a capital R, wherein they like feel drawn to one particular idea, but then they're like, oh no, maybe I should do this. So, kind of indulge in the going back and forth a little bit. But I always say that I want to find the place where the fun and the heart meets the pragmatism. So what are you excited to write about, which will drive your business or, your personal career, whatever goal you have for yourself professionally? How are we going to drive that forward with this book, and how is it going to be fun? So we look for the sweet spot of that in those planning sessions, and we talk about where do you want to be in 5 years? How is this going to set you up for this? Is there a particular client that you are serving now? Do you want to continue serving them, or do you want to do something else? And so how do we gear it toward that? And then taking a very intentional look and seeing, okay, here's where they are when they start, and they're going to be at this place when they finish. And then we just go through and we kind of go from the macro to the micro. We talk about the big themes, and then we break it down into individual chapters, and we get a rough outline for each chapter. And I've also created a lot of like self-study resources over the years. And so I give people access to that as part of those intensive sessions, and me to be their book coach in their pocket for 1 month as they really delve into it and jump off the starting blocks for their book.
And as far as like the work goes and the day-to-day, are there any kind of habits or practices that you've seen separate the people who want to write a book make a plan and write it versus the people who you check in with them and they're still thinking about it, or they're still on the first draft and they've been spinning their wheels for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that, if you're going to do it, then nothing can stop you. And so, I'm there to provide kind of guardrails as they begin to do it. But the people who just jump in kind of don't let anything be the reason why they don't do it. And everybody goes at different paces, which is fine. You know what I mean? It's totally fine. A lot of times people feel guilty because they're like not where they wanted to be at the end of 30 days, at the end of our engagement. But the people who really make a lot of progress and headway kind of jump in with both feet, and maybe they're not the world's best writer, but they might talk through a lot of things like on voice memo, and then at least have something to work with, that can then be transcribed and fixed up. And, they don't let anything be the reason that stops them from plunging in. So that's the big differentiator I see.
And do you think some of that is a case of, and this is not to be judgmental, but just like wanting it more? Like you wanted it enough to not let anything stop you or to do the things that you needed to do, versus like, I would like to say that I wrote a book, but I don't really want to write one badly enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, people have all different types of motivations for writing their book, right? Like, and none of them is bad. They're all just fine. It's a matter of how badly do you want it? How real does it feel to you? What do you see yourself doing with it once you have it published? How are you going to use it to market yourself? Like, what does it mean to you? And defining that for yourself. And then, I think it's really having a time limit on it can be very helpful. I don't know if you're familiar. This is kind of a sidebar, but are you familiar at all with Gretchen Rubin and her 4 tendencies?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So she has these, for people who aren't familiar, she has 4 tendencies, which are rebel, obliger, upholder, and questioner. Okay, I remember them. That's good. So it speaks to what motivates you. Yeah, are you somebody who is motivated? If you tell other people you're going to do it, then you want to oblige them and have it done by a certain time. In that case, you would be I'm giving a very rudimentary rundown of what these are, but that would be an obliger, and that would be, so telling others is a good way to motivate yourself to get it done. So all that to say, if you're someone who is an upholder, it's like if you say you're going to do it by this date, then you're going to do it by this date. So why don't you pick a date and have it done by that time? So it's individual, obviously, depending on who you are, but I think that can be a useful framework for people when they're considering what is going to be motivating enough for them to take on this big project and finish it, because it's worth it to finish it, both for the finished product itself and for who you become in the process of writing it.
That makes a lot of sense. That's cool. Yeah, I guess and that's where I think some of that, if I'm thinking again of this bro on LinkedIn, where that really generic advice of like there being one way to do things can fall flat, is like, well, no, like it shouldn't, like, it's true what you're saying that it's not going to be easy, but it shouldn't be like, you should find a way that works for you, where you're not encountering like additional difficulty in the process. And it sounds like what you're describing is to find your style of accountability. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. There's no one way that works for everyone, and whatever method works for you is the one that works. That's the one that you should go with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the whatever the category is, if I need someone to say that they don't think I can do it.
Oh, rebel.
That rebel. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, because I don't know. I've had a couple of projects where when it was all over, I was so much more grateful for the people who took a really dim view
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
my abilities, because I found that so motivating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I have one mentor in particular who I think sensed that early on and took that track, and it didn't feel great in the moment, but the result was wonderful.
Oh, that's interesting.
Um, but yeah, it's a fine line. There are plenty of people who will doubt because they're negative and they, you know.
Right. Yeah. It probably wouldn't work for an obliger or someone else. I'm an upholder. So I will like, I'm, if I say I'm going to do it, then I'm going to do it. I've thought about it very deeply before I even like commit to it. And by the time I commit to it, I have kind of a plan for how it's going to work. But that doesn't work for everybody. Everybody takes a different approach.
Um, Now, if you were advising somebody on like how to like how does someone approach the decision of whether to write a book on their own, maybe with some coaching or some guidance there, or work with a ghostwriter? Like what's a good way to think about that question for an author?
Well, the first thing to know is that ghostwriters are pretty expensive, so it's going to be costly if you work with a ghostwriter. So if you are someone who's writing, you have a business, and this book is going to support your business, and you have the funds to pay for a ghostwriter, and you have a plan for how you're going to get a return on investment, and you want it by a very specific deadline, maybe to coincide with, a business anniversary or a new launch or something, then it's a good idea to work with a ghostwriter, because they will be able to meet those deadlines. They're used to doing it, so they're used to time constraints, and they're not feeling their way through it for the first time. It's an efficient way of getting out. By the time we've dedicated our craft to being able to write books well. So if you want something that's polished and timely, then it's worth it to hire a ghostwriter. Some people really want to write it themselves, and it's kind of an individual thing. Each person has a sense about whether or not they want to hire a ghostwriter or whether they really want to do it themselves. And by all means, they should. There's lots of different resources that they can pull from, some that are completely free. You know what I mean? There's lots of guidance. There's writing groups that can really support authors, whichever track they want to take.
And it's worth pointing out, yeah, a lot of those groups are free public. I remember I think when I was in college, I found there was like at the local library, there was and it was like a group of like elderly retired people doing their memoirs, and I was trying to write short stories and like, but whatever, it was a writing group, and it was a
Yeah.
free, supportive
Uh-huh.
thing where I was able in this like small town, I was able to get some feedback and uh some editing, and it's not like I had to get into a program or take out a student loan or whatever.
I think that's so, yeah, I've been a part of very random writing groups over the years, and there's always something that you can learn from somebody else's feedback, even if they write stuff that you think is very poor, or it's something that you would never read yourself. That person can still give you very valuable feedback. So I would say, like, don't discount the feedback. Kind of take it all from a bird's eye view and consider it what is actually going to serve the work. But yeah, other writers, the community amongst other writers is really valuable, whatever form it comes in. So I encourage people to seek that out however they can.
And you wrote about, and we're almost at time here, but there's kind of one concept that runs through all of this, and I would imagine it's a big part of parenting as well as ghostwriting. But you have written about trust in the ghostwriting process as like this key element, and why is that so important? And how can both like the author and the ghostwriter make sure that they're building trust into their collaboration?
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of there's a certain amount that's gut feeling. between the ghostwriter and the writer, you know, because you're going to be working very closely for, let's say, a period of at least 4 months, probably, and more likely, 6 months, 8 months, more likely it's going to be longer than that. So you need to feel like that this is a person that you can work well with. One thing that and there's so much that goes into that, just being a basic, like, kind person, like the ghostwriter being kind and making them feel welcome and acknowledging that it's vulnerable to share your story and it's vulnerable to put it in the hands of someone else. So being, kind and empathetic and gracious is a large part of that, building trust. Also, a huge thing is just the simple act of doing what you say you're going to do. When I work with authors, I always really, level set in the beginning in terms of what to expect. And after we've done the outline and everything, then I say, like, okay, I give a sample chapter to say, like, this is how I'm thinking the tone should go for this story. This is a first chapter. I will proceed or not proceed based on your feedback for this, but I want to be sure that we're aligned on that from the beginning. And that goes a long way to building that trust, I think.
Cool. Well, last thing, I just want to make sure to plug Book in 6, because that is probably the easiest, most affordable, fastest way someone could work with you if they want to get started on their project with your help. Could you tell me a little bit about that and who might be interested in that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a resource that I made several years ago, and that I still think I still stand by, and people are still finding and getting a lot of use out of. And what I did was I wanted to take, like, the process that happens in my brain when I go from starting a book, not even having an outline, to completing a manuscript. And so I broke down a nonfiction manuscript, I should say. So I broke down the process into daily action items that and most of them take between 20 minutes and an hour. And I wanted to show people, okay, what I was talking about before, snatching little bits of time and writing when you can, and small word count increments, all of that done consistently adds up. And if you do that enough, you get a book. It's not mysterious. It's just a pretty straightforward process. So I really wanted to show people that. That was my intention for that, and to say, okay, this is how you can do it. And so, each day, like, it starts with 0. It starts with the idea, and this is how you refine your idea. This is how you build an outline day by day. This is how you write, like, 432 words a day or whatever it is. And then you don't even have to do it every day. You can take days off and rest and appreciate. And so those are built into the process as well. But that's what it is. It's a day by day calendar, 6-month calendar showing how to do it. And then there's some bonuses that come with it that help them tap into their best stories and know how to name their book and inhabit the mindset that will help them actually do it and see it through to the end. So that's what it is. That's what Book in 6 is all about.
Cool. Well, yeah, that's exciting stuff. And I think, kind of to your point about ghostwriting, a lot of times what people hire us for is to see it through to the end and to get a book done by a certain date. And yeah, it's always, tell me if you agree with this. I find that seeing a client cross the finish line can be, like, almost as satisfying as it's like there's this vicarious excitement of, like, I'm just as excited as they are to see them have that experience for themselves.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, it's amazing. Like, when they finish it, or when it gets published by, like, a big publishing house or whatever the benchmark is, like, it's very rewarding to see them have that experience, and then to see it do cool things in the world, and touch other people's lives. It's all, like, I feel we're in it with them. We are in it with them. So we can't help but celebrate when they cross those big finish lines.
Yeah. And I mean, if there's one thing just I can say to encourage people to work with a ghost or work with a developmental editor or a coach, it's that I think writing a book can be lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And it don't underestimate the value of having someone to share those the highs and the lows with you.
Yeah, for sure. I think anybody, every writer needs community of whatever way that comes in, whether you're working very closely with a collaborator or meeting with, older people at the library who are working on their memoirs, whatever form, whatever you need, you seek it out. Don't think that you have to do it by yourself.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for being here. And I'm glad we could make this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Charlie. This was really fun.
If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailyprose.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Jennifer's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.